Good evening, students. I hope I'm audible. Online student Shubranil. Good evening. Am I audible? All right. Thank you. So today we need to begin with a new chapter in our ancient India. That is the Vedic Age. Right. In our previous lecture, we have covered all important aspects of the Chalcolithic Age, and Vedic Age ka time period from the middle of the second millennium BC, that is 1500 BC to about 600 BC, after which the Mahajanpad period in India began, the phase of second urbanization or the Buddha age. Right? Now, the Vedic age has been further subdivided into the early Vedic age and the later Vedic age. Early Vedic age from 1500 to 1000 BC, and later Vedic age from 1000 to 600 BC. During this period, we saw a remarkable change in the way in which Vedic Aryans lived. We saw a change in their economy, society, political structure, and religious customs, etc. Right? Similarly, the available sources to study the two Vedic ages, the early and the Rig Vedic ages, are also different. When it comes to the literary sources, वैदिक एज को स्टडी करने के लिए which text exist? The Vedic text, also known as the Shruti literature, right? Now, this consists of four different kinds of works. कौन से? The Samhitas, Brahmanas, Aranyakas, and Upanishads. This we have already covered in the very first lecture. How subsistence agriculture leads to high fertility value in Chalcolithic period. किस कॉन्टेक्स्ट में पूछ रहे हो शुभ्रानिल? अच्छा, सोसाइटी मतलब रिलीजन में। तो फर्टिलिटी कल्ट के बारे में बात करी थी हमने। Fertility cult is part of the religious practice which values fertility above everything else. So if the people are praying, they are praying for greater fertility and higher production of their crops, right? And this is always going to be a result of the beginning of agriculture only. उसके पहले ऐसे practices होंगे religion में? Probably not, because people have not understood the importance of soil fertility, right? So that is why, as a result of the emergence of agriculture, or as agriculture becomes more and more important for any economy, the fertility cult starts getting more and more important. ठीक है? अच्छा, No, not fecundity of human beings, fecundity of agriculture, fecundity of crops. Right. Now, for the early Vedic age, we have only one contemporary literary source, and that is the Rig Ved Samhita. So, in our first chapter, sources, we had covered all these categories of literature. You remember? Samhita consists of the basic collection of hymns. So, collection of hymns of the Rig Ved are composed in the compiled in the form of the Rig Vedic Samhita. Only this text was composed during the Rig Vedic period. That is why the early Vedic age is also known as the Rig Vedic age. Right? Now, as for the later Vedic age, it consists of the rest of the Shruti literature. That is, the Samhitas of the three later Vedas, that is, Samved, Yajurved, and Atharvaved, as well as all the Brahmanas, which consists of the rules for performing rituals or sacrifices or yagyas, the Aranyakas, which explore the philosophical basis of the rituals mentioned in the yagyas, sometimes supporting them, sometimes criticizing them, and Upanishads, right? These are works of pure philosophy having nothing to do with ritualism, right? So they explore metaphysical questions such as the nature of the universe, nature of God, the presence or non-existence of the soul, what happens after death, the concept of salvation, etc. So these kinds of things. All these texts belong to the later Vedic age, is time period के. However, neither the Samhita of the Rig Ved nor any of the later Vedic texts were compiled during the period of their composition. That means that they were composed in an oral form and transmitted from generation to generation over more than 1,000 years for an extremely long period. And it is only after the end of the later Vedic age, during the Mahajanpad period, around 600 to 300 BC, that they were written down in text form for the first time. Okay? So both these types of texts were composed during the Vedic age, but compiled much later. Their transmission took place through the oral tradition throughout the Vedic age. ठीक? Now, apart from this, literary sources और किस तरह के sources हो सकते हैं? Archaeological sources. Now, when it comes to the early Vedic age, we find the cultural remains of several late Harappan cultures, such as the Gandhar grave culture, the cemetery etch culture, and the painted grey ware cultures. एटसेट्रा, इनको हमें लेट हड़प्पन नहीं, रादर पोस्ट हड़प्पन कल्चर्स बोलना चाहिए, राइट? बिकॉज the people who left behind these remains had little to do with the Harappan people or the late Harappan people. They were a new group of people who were coming to India from outside. They were coming to the region of Punjab and the Indus Valley from Afghanistan, who were themselves migrants from other places such as Central Asia and further afield such as Eurasia, right? तो वहां से आ रहे थे और इस तरह की इन्होंने कल्चरल रिमेन्स छोड़े हैं. देन फॉर द लेटर वैदिक एज किस तरह का एविडेंस मिलता है हमें? वी फाइंड अ लार्ज नंबर ऑफ पीजीडब्ल्यू साइट्स. Apart from that, we find some cultures which made a different kind of pottery known as ochre colored pottery. Apart from that, we also have a large number of cultures who left behind collections of copper objects. So these copper objects, when they are left behind in a large accumulation, they are known as copper hoards. Okay? So they are known as copper hoard sites. Right. Now, how to distinguish between the painted grey ware culture of the later Vedic age and the painted grey ware of the early Vedic age? The later Vedic people had started using one new metal which was not known in the early Vedic age. What was that? From this point onwards, from 1000 BC onwards, the use of which new metal started? Iron. So these are painted grey ware cultures with iron objects. And these are painted grey ware cultures without iron objects. Now, in which part of the subcontinent will you find the majority of the archaeological remains of the early Vedic age? Indus Valley or Ganga Valley? Indus Valley. They were coming from the region of Afghanistan. First, they arrived in the Indus Valley, and only towards the beginning of the later Vedic age would they start migrating towards the Ganga Valley eastwards in large numbers. So, ये वाले remains हमको majority मिलते हैं इंडस वैली रीजन से. और इंडस एंड सरस्वती वैली रीजन से. एंड ये वाले कल्चर्स वी फाइंड some from the Indus Saraswati River Valley zone, but majority from the Gangetic Valley region. ठीक है? So before we start discussing the specific topics within the Rig Vedic age, let us take down a short introduction and talk about the sources. So give the subheading introduction. पहले वैदिक एज का ही टोटल एक ओवरऑल इंट्रोडक्शन ले लेते हैं. सोर्सेज. with the heading introduction hyphen sources. लिखो. The middle of the second millennium BCE, the middle of the second millennium BCE marked the beginning of India's historical age. of India's historical age. Full stop. The oldest written texts available in India belong to this period. Full stop. These are the Sanskrit Vedas. These are the Sanskrit Vedas. After whom this age is known as the Vedic Age. Is known as the Vedic Age. Within brackets, 1500 to 600 BCE. Next main point. Historians have divided this age into the early and later Vedic ages based upon changes in the economy, polity, society, religion, and the available sources. Full stop. Next main point. Vedic literature is comprised of the Samhitas, Brahmanas, Aranyakas, and Upanishads. Full stop. It is also known as Shruti literature. And is believed to be a revealed work of divine origin. ठीक है. Next main point. Out of the large compilation of Shruti texts, comma, only the Rig Vedic Samhita was composed in the early Vedic age. Full stop. The composition of other Shruti works occurred during the later Vedic age. Occurred during the later Vedic age. Full stop. Next point. Or sub point. However, all these works were compiled much later in the post-Vedic period. So stop. Next sub point. Throughout the Vedic age, their composition and transmission happened within the oral tradition. Full stop. Next main point. The earliest surviving manuscripts or the earliest surviving Vedic manuscripts belong to the 5th century AD or 5th century CE. 5th century CE. Okay? So even after they were written down, we do not have any surviving works for more than 1000 years. So ऋग वैदिक एज के बाद करीब 2000 साल बाद लिखा हुआ वर्क हमारे पास अवेलेबल है, right? So beginning of ऋग वैदिक age 1500, earliest surviving written that is the manuscripts that they belong to 500 AD, so almost 2000 years after the beginning of the ऋग वैदिक age. So as a result, would historians rely upon the Vedic sources as concrete evidence for history, or are there always going to be certain doubts? क्यों? ऑथरशिप के बारे में हम क्लियर नहीं है सबसे पहले तो, फिर उसके बाद what are the things that were removed from the original works, what were the things that were inserted, about that we are not clear. Then how the changing political, economic, social and religious atmosphere throughout this lengthy period of more than 2000 years has had an impression on the original composition of the works, we are not able to make certain ये क्या क्या changes हुए, right? And as a result, historians are always interested in finding more archaeological sources to corroborate, verify or negate information from the different Vedic texts. Clear? Next main point likho. Due to this shortcoming, there is a great push to verify historical information in the Vedic texts against archaeological evidence. Full stop. Next point. लेकिन प्रॉब्लम क्या है यहाँ पर? Although the Vedic age took place after the Harappan civilization, it appears that Vedic people did not leave the kind of durable archaeological remains that the Harappans had. Therefore, findings are extremely rare, right? Write down. Despite this, comma, the archaeological study of the Vedic age remains rather limited. Remains rather limited. Full stop. The archaeology of the Vedic age is neither as rich nor as diverse as that of the Harappan civilization. As that of the Harappan civilization. As that of the Harappan civilization. Full stop. Subpoint. Apart from small collections of copper and iron objects, pottery, and a few small settlements, very little archaeological evidence of the Vedic age has been discovered. Why do you think this was? क्यों है ऐसा? ये हड़प्पन सिविलाइजेशन के लिए तो बहुत सारा आर्कियोलॉजिकल एविडेंस मिलता है, बट वैदिक सिविलाइजेशन which started to emerge almost 1000 years after the mature Harappan civilization had emerged, उसके लिए इतना एविडेंस क्यों नहीं मिलता है? Because of basic differences in the natures of the Harappan civilization and the Vedic culture, right? Harappan civilization was what kind of civilization? It was a large, well-developed, organized and urban civilization. They lived in large cities made of burnt bricks with a rich material culture. Vedic Aryans, on the other hand, arrived in India from outside as pastoralists. They were nomads, moving from pasture to pasture during the different seasons in search of better food for their cattle. It is only towards the end of the Rig Vedic age that they began switching over to agriculture as the mainstay of the economy. And this represented the initial beginnings of settled agriculture. So this was not the peak of agriculture settled economy, it was the very infantile stage, right? So the kinds of structures that they built, the kinds of settlements that they made, they were nowhere near the sophistication or nor had the durability as that of the Harappan civilization. Clear? And that is why you find a very little archaeological evidence for the Vedic age as compared to the Harappan civilization. Write down next point, main point. This may be a reflection of the basic differences in the character of these two cultural systems. Subpoint. The Harappan civilization was a sophisticated, extensive, and organized urban civilization with a highly sophisticated or with a highly advanced material culture, with a highly advanced material culture. Stop. On the other hand, next point. On the other hand, comma, the Vedic Aryans were pastoralists who had started shifting towards agriculture. Full stop. The level of their material advancement was understandably lower. Okay. So what did the Vedic people call themselves? Arya. The word Arya is a Sanskrit word which means noble. And this has been adopted by historians as well. The Vedic people are therefore known as Aryans. Next point, write down. The Vedic people, main point, referred to themselves as Arya, meaning noble, within brackets, meaning noble. Full stop. As such, modern historians call them Aryans. Modern historians call them Aryans. Okay? Now, who were the Aryans? Do they represent a distinct racial group, or do they represent a distinct linguistic group, or do they represent a distinct religious group? This has been a matter of great controversy, right? Now, in the early 20th century, the fascist leaders of Europe, specifically Hitler, he hijacked the term Aryans to refer to the German race. What was the belief behind this, or what was the basis behind this belief? कैसे explain किया? According to Hitler and people like him, Germany's original inhabitants came from Central Asia. They were the descendants of the early Aryans who had also set up the Indian civilization later on. Okay? And according to Hitler, not only were they a distinct racial group, but they were also the superior race. So the element of racial superiority was also inserted into it, right? And since they are the superior race in accordance with the evolutionary principle of survival of the fittest, what should be the status of the superior race? Should it be at the bottom of the social hierarchy or at the very top? Should be at the very top. So, since they were superior, they were also supposed to represent the master race. Okay? Then, certain religious groups, what have they claimed? Especially Hindu nationalists, इन्होंने क्या claim किया है? That they were a distinct religious group. They were the early ancestors of all modern Hindus. ठीक है? And further, क्या claim किया है? They have borrowed a leaf out of the book of people such as Hitler. And what have they claimed? That since this is the oldest surviving religious culture ever to exist in the entire world, oldest नहीं बोल रहा हूँ, oldest surviving system of beliefs and practices, it has proven its superiority already, right? So it is also the superior religion. Further, they have claimed, what was the birthplace of this religious custom, of this religious system? Central Asia या फिर India? India, right? So, according to them, this religious group was born in India and from there it spread to the rest of the world. But outside India, these groups came into contact with other people and their original religious beliefs were corrupted somehow. They were distorted, right? So, they claim that India also has cultural and religious links with the entire Asian and European culture. In fact, according to them, the original culture of Asia and Europe was a descendant of Indian culture, since the religions of Asia and Central Asia and Europe were descendants of this Aryan religion only. And it is only after the emergence of the Abrahamic religions such as Christianity or Islam that the early religions of Europe and Central Asia, they came under attack. But claim क्या किया है? Since this was the original one, they should return to it. So they have framed it in terms of a conflict of religious systems. Clear? Now, both these explanations are problematic. इसमें problem क्या है? That Aryans represented a superior race on the basis of DNA analysis, or एंशियंट डीएनए एनालिसिस क्या देखने के लिए मिला है? That the people who had started to migrate from Eurasia in different directions, towards Russia also, towards Europe also, towards the Middle East also, towards Persia also, towards Central Asia, and finally India also, they did not belong to a single racial group. They had mixed ethnicity. Okay? So they belong to a diverse racial mixture. तो ऐसा नहीं है कि सब गोरे होंगे, सबके बाल ब्लॉन्ड होंगे, सबकी आंखें नीली होंगी. दिस वॉज नॉट द केस. दैट इज वाई दिस हैज बिन discarded. Further, what was the objective of Hitler behind giving this entire Germanic Aryan race theory? To justify his own military expansion, his conquest over the whole of Europe. तो उसके लिए कोई ना कोई एक justification देना था. He also needed a flag around which his people could organize, people को mobilize करने के लिए, right? So it was a political tool that was used by him. यहाँ पे प्रॉब्लम क्या है? That while trying to frame the relationship between the Aryan culture and the Abrahamic religions, the propounders of this idea have made a basic mistake. Kya? They have assumed that the modern Hindus, like the modern Muslims or the modern Christians, belong to a homogeneous and monolithic religious group. Right? ऐसा नहीं है. Hinduism, even now, is best described by the most accomplished religious scholars not as an organized religion but as a way of life, जिसमें अंदर से इतनी ज्यादा फ्लेक्सिबिलिटी होती है that Hindu of one period or one region is completely distinct from the Hindu living in another region. For example, महाराष्ट्र में जाओगे तो आपको गणेश जी की पूजा देखने के लिए मिलेगी, बंगाल में तो माता की पूजा देखने के लिए मिलती है. These kinds of things, right? So, first of all, first mistake is that Hinduism is not an organized religion. दूसरा mistake, that based upon the studies of the Vedic texts and the literary works of other Aryan groups, such as the Persian people or the Germanic people or the people who inhabited Asia Minor, that is the region of Turkey or Syria or Iraq, etc., we find that not everybody worshipped the same gods and goddesses. Therefore, even back then, there was no single religious system. Okay? So, there is no evidence of historical religious homogeneity. For example, in some places, fire was worshipped, and in other places, fire worship was considered to be a sin, right? These kinds of things existed. And thirdly, the idea that this religious system, which has been described as the Aryan religious system, emerged first in India, that has also been discarded on the basis of religious and literary evidence. क्या माना जाता है? Aryans were not the original inhabitants of India, rather they came to India from outside. Therefore, their religious system and the customs were also foreign to India. They were not the products of India. ठीक है? So, the theory of Indian origin of Aryans has also been discarded. Clear? तो बचता क्या explanation है? That they were a linguistic group. मतलब क्या हुआ? That Aryans were descendants of people who spoke the same language. That means Sanskrit was itself a descendant of an ancestor language from which other languages also emerged. That means Sanskrit, what was their relationship with these other languages? Were they related at all or not? Yes. And relatives को क्या बोलते हैं? Family. It was part of a family of languages. And what is this family known as? The Indo-European family of languages. Consisting of both ancient as well as modern languages, such as Sanskrit, Persian, Latin, English, German, Hindi, etc. And in सारी languages में common link क्या है? They emerged from a common ancestor language. That was the original language spoken by the ancestors of people we today refer to as Aryans. Clear? And how do we know that they belong to the same family of languages? On the basis of phonetics and linguistics. All these languages have several words which share the same common root words, such as cattle in Sanskrit is known as gau. Father in Sanskrit is known as pitra. Brother is known as bhrata. Daughter is known as duhitri, right? In Persian, गाय मिलता जुलता है ना, गौ एंड गाय. पितृ, पादरी. भ्राता, बिरादर. दुहित्री, दुख्तर. अंग्रेजी में काउ. पितृ इज फादर. भ्राता इज ब्रदर. दुख्तर और दुहित्री इज daughter, and so on and so forth. Clear? So this indicates that all these languages emerged from a common ancestral language And since it was from this common group that Aryans have emerged, and since they have diverse racial features as well as diverse religious practices, they are best described as a linguistic group rather than anything else. Clear? Now, last आपने क्या चीज लिखी है? We have to write about this ना, Aryans, racial group or linguistic group or religious group. Aryans. Now give the next heading. Aryans hyphen a race, comma, a religious community, or a linguistic group. Write down. There has been much controversy. There has been much controversy with regards to the nature of the Aryan people. Full stop. What made them Aryan? What made them Aryan? Question mark. A common race, comma, a common religion, or a common language, or a common language? Question mark. Next main point. In the early 20th century, fascist European leaders, led by Adolf Hitler, appropriated the term Aryan as a synonym for the Germanic race. Appropriated the term Aryan as a synonym for the Germanic race. Claiming that it was the master race meant to rule the world. Full stop. Sub point. However, genetic studies and the pattern of human migration shows that the early steppe dwellers, steppe grasslands की बात कर रहे हैं, which spread all the way from Mongolia in the east to Hungary in the west, right? Steppe dwellers consisted of a diverse racial mix. A diverse racial mix. Thus, it is impossible to assign a distinct racial identity to Aryans. To Aryans. Full stop. Next subpoint. It is widely agreed that the myth of a master race of Aryans was created by Hitler. To justify his military expansion. ठीक है? Next main point. Some Hindu nationalist groups have claimed that the Aryans originated in India and laid the foundations of its Hindu civilization. Full stop. From India, they expanded across Asia to Europe, where the Hindu civilization flourished till the onslaught of the Abrahamic religions, within brackets Christianity and Islam, began. Subpoint. However, most modern historians have dismissed the idea that Aryans originated in India. Next subpoint. Further, this is clearly an attempt to redefine India as a culturally Hindu civilization. by certain groups. By certain groups. Full stop. Next point. The truth is that modern Hindus are equally as diverse as Aryans, as early Aryans, as early Aryans, when it comes to religious beliefs and practices. Religious beliefs and practices. Full stop. Next point. Unlike Islam or Christianity, Hinduism is not an organized religion, even in the theoretical sense. Even in the theoretical sense. Full stop. It is being deliberately presented as one. It is being deliberately presented as one to fulfill a political and social agenda. And social agenda. क्लियर है इतना? समझ में आया? अच्छा, नेक्स्ट मेन पॉइंट लिखो. According to most modern historians and linguists, most modern historians and linguists, comma, the Aryans represent a linguistic group speaking a common language. Full stop. Subpoint. Based on linguistic analysis, it appears that the Sanskrit speaking Vedic Aryans, were descendants of people who inhabited a cold, dry place in the second millennium BCE. What is this cold, dry place? According to most modern historians, Central Asia wala region, right? Central Eurasia wala region. So within brackets you can write probably the Central Asian and Eurasian steppe regions or steppe grasslands. How do we know कि cold dry place थे जहाँ पे हवा बहुत तेज बहती थी? Because most of the words are spoken in such a manner that you don't have to open your mouth very wide, right? Because that would mean a loss of heat. And as a result, मुंह को ज्यादा खोले बिना बोलने की आदत लोगों ने डाली. That is how the common ancestor language of the Aryans had developed. This is a feature of all the Indo-European family of languages, including संस्कृत, पर्शियन, इंग्लिश, जितने भी हैं सब में आपको ये फीचर देखने के लिए मिल जाएगा. नेक्स्ट सब पॉइंट लिखो. ड्यूरिंग दिस पीरियड comma these Eurasian horse riders began migrating in different directions. Resulting in the emergence of a large family of languages in different regions, known as the Indo-European family. ठीक है. Next sub point. It consists of languages such as you can write the names of these languages: Sanskrit, Persian, Latin, English, German, Hindi, etc. Sanskrit, Persian, Latin, English, German, Hindi, etc. Full stop. They all emerged from a common ancestor since they share several words with the same root, or since they share the same root words. They share the same root words. ठीक है. नेक्स्ट मेन पॉइंट लिखो. Thus, it is clear that the Aryans represented neither a racial group nor a religious group, but a linguistic group. Neither a racial group nor a religious group, but a linguistic group. Take down a question. Did the term Aryans represent a distinct race or religion Question mark. If not, what is the basis of recognizing them as a distinct group? Question mark. 200 words, 15 marks. हो जाएगा? ठीक है. Now, next we have to talk about a debate that we have already touched upon when we were talking about the Aryans being a religious group. Debate क्या है? It is about the original homeland of the Aryans. Now, on the one hand, there is a particular group of scholars who insist that Aryans originated from India. So, India is the original homeland of the Aryans. The subcontinent is the original homeland of the Aryans. इसमें leading name किसका है? The famous historian B.B. Lal, right? He put forward this idea in the late 1990s, early 2000s. Okay? And on the other hand, there are other historians who claim that it was outside India. That is the Eurasian steppe. ठीक है. Now, हमें देखना क्या है? What is the evidence that both sides have presented? ठीक है. Now, B.B. Lal and others like him have argued that out of all the Indo-European languages, सबसे पुरानी वाली कौन सी है? संस्कृत. And therefore it is the common ancestor of all the Indo-European family of languages. And Sanskrit literature kaha ka native hai? Is it native of India or any other part of the world? India. And thus, original homeland of the Aryans was Indians, and it is from India that they migrated outwards. ठीक है? Further, they have argued that Sanskrit is not only the oldest of the Indo-European languages, but has the most number of words with Vedic roots as well. ठीक है. तो यहाँ पे इन्होंने क्या एक्सप्लेन किया है? That as we move away from India towards the west, the influence of Vedic words, is that going to increase or is it going to decline? It is going to decline. So argument क्या है? That Vedas, which are the oldest works, were created in India by the Aryans before they migrated out of India. ठीक है. And having migrated out of India, they came into contact with other groups of people who were speaking their own languages. These places had also their own material cultures as well as their own ecological conditions, and thus the languages evolved out of it. Thus the language evolved, and further away you go from India, the more the distance is between the early Vedic Sanskrit and the native Indo-European language. ठीक है, तो इन्होंने एक ये भी आर्ग्यूमेंट दिया है. एंड thirdly, it has been argued that in the Vedas, the people who composed them very clearly, that is emphatically and repeatedly claimed that the Sapt Sindhav, that is the land of the seven Induses, was the Aryavarta, that is the homeland of the Aryans. ठीक है. And if the Aryans were actually from outside India, then such a thing was extremely surprising. It was extremely contradictory to the literature of other migratory groups. Other migratory groups अपना जो ओरिजिनल होमलैंड होता है उसके लिए बहुत डीपली इमोशनल होते हैं, राइट, एंड देयर लिटरेचर आल्सो रिफ्लेक्ट्स द सेम इमोशन. However, the Aryans, the Vedic Aryans, seems to be emotional only about this land. They call it the holiest of all lands. They call it the best of all lands. They do not mention any other lands, right? So that is why it is to be believed that India and no other place was the original homeland of the Aryans. Okay? And finally, if you compare the Vedic philosophy, the thoughts and culture with the other contemporary cultures of Central Asia or West Asia or Europe, इनमें से सबसे ज्यादा advanced कौन से थे? It was the Vedic one. So the Vedic philosophy was the most sophisticated of all contemporary Indo-European cultures. Clear? So that means क्या हुआ होगा? जो कोर रीजन है, सबसे ज्यादा मटेरियल सोफिस्टिकेशन, कल्चरल सोफिस्टिकेशन, फिलोसॉफिकल सोफिस्टिकेशन वहां पे होगा, या फिर जो पेरिफेरल एरियाज हैं सिविलाइजेशन के वहां पे होगा? जो कोर रीजन है वहां पे होगा. एंड दिस इज एग्जैक्टली व्हाट इज एक्सप्रेस्ड बाय बीबी लाल एंड अदर्स. ठीक है, तो पहले इतना लिख लेते हैं, फिर उसके बाद कंटिन्यू करते हैं. गिव द हेडिंग ओरिजिनल होमलैंड ऑफ द आर्यंस. सब हेडिंग दो थ्योरी ऑफ इंडियन ओरिजिन. थ्योरी ऑफ इंडियन ओरिजिन लिखो. It was put forward by scholars such as B. Lal and others. Full stop. They have argued that the Sapt Sindhav region mentioned often in the Rig Veda was the original homeland of the Aryans. And it is from here, that they migrated. It is from here that they migrated towards other regions. Towards other regions. Okay. Next point. They have argued that Sanskrit, being the oldest of all Indo-European languages, was their common ancestor. Was their common ancestor. Full stop. Next point. Sanskrit also has the most words with Vedic roots. And as Sanskrit traveled outside the subcontinent with migrating Aryans, it became progressively diluted. Outside the subcontinent with migrating Aryans, it became progressively diluted, or better would be to write, it underwent progressive linguistic dilution. It underwent, with migrating Aryans, it underwent progressive linguistic dilution. As it migrated outside the subcontinent with migrating Aryans, it underwent progressive linguistic dilution. ये समझ में आया? Next main point लिखो. Thirdly, B.B. Lal argues that the repeated referrals by the Rigvedic Aryans to the region of Sapt Sindhav, as the Aryavart, within brackets, land of the Aryans, as Aryavart, or land of the Aryans, proves that this was their original homeland. Subpoint. Migrant groups tend to always remember and glorify their original homelands. Their original homelands. And it is unlikely that Aryans would have forgotten about it. That Aryans would have forgotten about it after arriving in India. In India. Okay. Next point, main point. Finally, it is argued that Vedic literature represents the highest achievements, represents the highest achievement in philosophy and thought among all contemporary Indo-European cultures. Among all contemporary Indo-European cultures. Full stop. Subpoint. Thus, it is likely that the land of the Vedas was also the land of the Aryans, the homeland of the Aryans, the homeland of the Aryans. The homeland of the Aryans. समझ में आया है सारे पॉइंट्स? ये तो हो गया थ्योरी ऑफ इंडियन ओरिजिन. On the other hand, we have the theory of foreign origin. Now, other scholars have rejected the theory of Indian origin on the basis of the study of linguistics, archaeology, literature, as well as genetics. ठीक है? Now, linguistics में हमें क्या देखने के लिए मिलता है? That Sanskrit has a number of unique sounds that are known as retroflex sounds. Right? Retroflex sounds are the sounds that are made by the tongue or the tip of the tongue hitting against the palate of the mouth. So some etc. ठीक है? तो जो hard sounds होती हैं, they are known as retro sounds. Sanskrit or Vedic Sanskrit has more than 300 such sounds in its entire vocabulary. Right? On the other hand, on average, the Indo-European languages consist of less than 5 sounds for each such language. Okay? So this is a distinct feature of Sanskrit only. Now, had Sanskrit been the root language, the ancestor language of all European languages, would there have been such a few languages with any retroflex sounds? They should also have inherited these retroflex sounds. So historians ने बोला क्या है, linguists ने बोला क्या है, that these Aryans arrived to the Indian subcontinent speaking a language which had very few retroflex sounds, but they picked up these sounds through their closer association with the original inhabitants of the subcontinent. That is the late Harappan people and the Chalcolithic people. They were speaking a group of languages which are considered to be the common ancestor of the four Dravidian languages. And in these Dravidian languages such as Tamil or Kannada or Malayalam or Telugu, you find a large number of retroflex sounds. So डायरेक्शन ऑफ मूवमेंट इन लोगों का क्या रहा होगा फ्रॉम इंडिया आउट टुवर्ड्स द फॉरेन लैंड्स और फ्रॉम फॉरेन लैंड्स टुवर्ड्स इंडिया फ्रॉम फॉरेन लैंड टुवर्ड्स इंडिया एक तो ये एक्सप्लेनेशन दिया गया आर्कियोलॉजी के बेसिस पे क्या देखने के लिए मिलता है दैट देर आर नो आर्यन remains in the subcontinent dating before 1500 BC. ठीक है. On the other hand, we have a large number of Aryan remains from Asia Minor, Syria, Iraq, etc. Groups of people known as Hittites or Mitannis, Kassites, etc., who lived in these regions. They have left behind both physical remains as well as inscriptions and date as far back as 2200 BC. आर्यंस पहले कहाँ प्रेजेंट थे इंडिया में या बाहर बाहर प्रेजेंट थे on the basis of literature also this is reflected. For example, the Rig Veda mentions the name of several tribes of Aryans, right? Such as the Bharat tribe, the Yadu tribe, the Turvasa tribe, the Puru tribe, etc. Right? But it also clearly mentions that Indra, who was the supreme deity of the Vedic Aryans, brought certain tribes to India later on, such as the Yadu and Turvasu, etc. Right? Then, from literature, we also get glimpses into the religious practices of Aryans. One of the prominent religious practices of Aryans was the performance of yagyas. Yeah, right? So fire altars banate the. And who was the god of fire? Agni. Okay. In fact, there is mention of a famous battle in the Rig Veda found from the 10th mandala. This is known as the Das Rajan Yuddha hymn. यहाँ पे एक साइड पे एक आर्यन ट्राइब था दैट इज द भारत ट्राइब that was fighting in a major battle with a collection of 10 other tribes. So out of which 5 were Aryan tribes, 5 were non-Aryan tribes. The Bharat tribe emerged victorious and celebrated its victory by conducting a huge yagya, right? So yagya or fire worship is evidence of the worship of Agni. Agni is also mentioned as one of the chief deities in the Rig Veda along with Indra and Varun. Indra was the god of rain and thunderstorms. He was also the god of war. He is also regarded as the breaker of forts. He has about 250 different hymns dedicated to him. The second most important god seems to be Agni, with almost 200 different hymns or shlokas dedicated to him. The third most important god was Varun, with almost 175 hymns dedicated to him. However, if you compare this collection of gods to gods who are worshipped by Aryans living outside India, यहाँ पे आपको एक डिफरेंस देखने के लिए मिलेगा. देयर इज अ प्लेस इन प्रेजेंट डे टर्की एनाटोलिया रीजन में नोन एज बोगस कोई. वहां से एक इंस्क्रिप्शन मिला है, बोगस कोई इंस्क्रिप्शंस. On it are written the terms of a peace treaty concluded between two warring tribes or two warring groups of Aryans. Now, इस ट्रीटी को सोलेमनाइज करने के लिए दे took the oaths or they took the names, they have invoked certain gods, right? तो कुछ गॉड्स की कसम खाई है. एंड यहाँ पे कौन से गॉड्स मेंशन्ड हैं? इंद्रा, वरुण, मित्रा and the Nasatyas or the Ashwini twins. Huh? Mitra. Mitra was the name of a god that they used to worship. We do not know किस चीज के god थे ये, ठीक है? And the Ashwini twins, right? Now यहाँ पे कौन से god missing है? Agni is missing, right? Fire worship, on the other hand, we know was a practice which was common among the Harappans as well as the late Harappan people. तो अंदाजा क्या लगाया जाता है? That Aryans, और ये इंस्क्रिप्शन कब का है? अराउंड 1800 BC. ठीक है? That Aryans who began arriving in India from around 1500 BC onwards came into contact with the late Harappan people and adopted some of their customs. So fire worship was something that they started only after coming to India. It did not exist before that. ठीक है? तो ये अंदाजा लगाया जाता है. And finally, on the basis of the study of genetics, क्या पता लग सकता है? We study the skeletal remains or the genetic material of Aryans in India also and Aryans in Europe or Central Asia also. तो वहां पे क्या मिलेगा आपको? Will you find genetic similarities or not? You will find genetic similarities. So we find genetic similarities. But not only that, on the basis of comparative analysis, एक और चीज निकल के आती है. क्या? The level of Aryan DNA in the people who were living in these regions. क्या देखने के लिए मिलता है? ज्यादा कॉन्सेंट्रेशन ऑफ आर्यन डीएनए इंडिया में मिलेगा या बाहर मिलता है? बाहर मिलता है. इंडिया में the volume of Aryan DNA starts building up in a gradual manner to reach its peak from around the later Vedic age onwards. उसके पहले build-up हो रहा था. That means these represented a new genetic input that was not present in the original composition of the Indian population. So you get idea not only that there were groups who had common ancestry both in Eurasia as well as India, but also in the direction of migration as well. ठीक है? दोनों चीजें पता लग जाती हैं हमको. And on the basis of this, क्या पता लगता है? That the theory of foreign origin of the Aryans is consolidated, right? So that is, it is more, it appears to be better presented. ठीक है? तो ये हो गया theory of the original homeland of the Aryans. Give this subheading. Number 1, ओरिजिनल होमलैंड ऑफ द आर्यंस के नीचे सबसे पहला लिखो थ्योरी ऑफ इंडियन ओरिजिन. लिख लिया? अच्छा. तो नेक्स्ट राइट नंबर 2, Theory of foreign origin. Theory of foreign origin. Write down. According to most historians, the Aryans did not originate in the subcontinent but arrived in India from 1500 BCE onwards. From 1500 BCE onwards. From 1500 BCE onwards. Full stop. The following arguments have been presented to support this theory. To support this theory. Been presented to support this theory. One by one, write down. First point. Linguistics. Linguistics. लिखो. Sanskrit consists of a large number of retroflex sounds. Of retroflex sounds. Within brackets, you can write t, th, d, dh, etc. ठीक है? However, such sounds are very rare in other Indo-European languages. In other Indo-European languages. Next subpoint. Therefore, Aryans must have adopted these sounds from the original natives of the Indus Saraswati region after arriving there. Within brackets, you can write the late Harappan and Chalcolithic people. The late Harappan and Chalcolithic people. These are the original inhabitants. Late Harappan and Chalcolithic people. ठीक है? नेक्स्ट मेन पॉइंट लिखो. हाँ, सबसे पहला लिंग्विस्टिक्स, सेकंड लिखो आर्कियोलॉजी. लिखो. No archaeological remains older than 1500 BCE in the Indian subcontinent have been associated with Aryans. With Aryans. Full stop. Thus, it is believed that they did not exist here before this. Full stop. Next point. On the other hand, archaeological remains associated with Aryan adjacent groups, such as Hitanis, Mitanis, and Kassites. Belonging to as early as 2200 BCE. Belonging to as early as 2200 BCE have been found from Asia Minor, Syria, and Iraq, respectively. ठीक है. Number 3, literature. The Rig Veda mentions the names of several Aryan tribes, such as the Yadu, Turvasu, Puru, Bharat, etc. But mentions that Indra brought Yadu and Turvasu later on. Next argument under literature only. लिखो. The Rig Veda establishes Indra, Agni, and Varun as the 3 most important early Vedic gods. Full stop. Subpoint. However, the bogus Khoi inscription. Dated to 1800 BCE. Which records a peace treaty between the Hittanis and the Mittanis, or Hittites and Mittites, between the Hittanis and Mittanis, does not mention the name of Agni while invoking other gods such as Indra, Varun, Mitra, and the Nasatyas. वही नसात्याज, उनको अश्विनी ट्विंस भी बोलते हैं. And the Nasatyas or Ashwini twins. Next subpoint. It appears that subpoint is जैसे अभी लिखा है वैसे subpoint. It appears that Aryans adopted fire worship after coming into contact with the late Harappan and Chalcolithic people of India. Full stop. This was not an original religious practice among them. Number 4, genetics. Write down. Based on the analysis of ADNA, पहला वाला A स्मॉल में, ADNA, एंशिएंट डीएनए को ADNA बोलते हैं. Based on the analysis of ADNA, numerous studies have shown that during the second millennium BCE, a large number of steppe pastoralists from the Caucasus region Caucasus is a mountain range. ठीक है, कहां पर located है? Between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. This over here is the Mediterranean Sea. Mediterranean Sea से लगा हुआ ये Black Sea, and further to its east यहाँ पे Caspian Sea. ये जो रीजन है, this is known as the Caucasus Mountain region, right? Present day यहाँ पे countries हैं such as let's see, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, etc. ये सब countries यहाँ पे आपको मिल जाती हैं. And it is from this region that it is believed that most of these groups began migrating in different directions, because this was on the crossroads between Eurasia, West Asia, Europe and Central Asia. That is why यहाँ से migrate करना इन्होंने शुरू किया. Clear? अच्छा, क्या लिखा अभी आपने? हाँ, Caucasus region began migrating in different directions. Full stop. Sub point. Among them, one group reached the northwestern portion of the Indian subcontinent. Northwestern portion of the Indian subcontinent from 1500 BCE onwards. From 1500 BCE onwards. ठीक है. Now, next we need to talk about the debate regarding the Aryan invasion theory. This debate we have already addressed earlier, but in the context of the decline of the Harappan civilization, right? Over here, there are 2 points of view that Aryan invasion did happen. This is known as the Aryan invasion theory, given by scholars such as Mortimer Wheeler, right? However, it has largely been discarded. Result क्या हुआ इसका? Twofold result. First of all, the theories of Harappan decline now became an open subject of debate. तो यहाँ पे जो original views थे Aryan invasion theory के, they were challenged. And second, the very idea of a massive and sudden Aryan invasion itself was rejected, right? And it is in this scenario that the second explanation was presented, that is Aryan migration theory. क्या predicate है यहाँ पर? That Aryans never mounted a massive and sudden invasion of the Indian subcontinent. Rather, they began trickling into India in successive waves where one or two bands of Aryans would arrive in India from outside. And this was a very long drawn process lasting more than 500 years. So it began with the beginning of the early Vedic age, but ended only after the end of the later Vedic age. Okay? So for almost 1000 years, these groups of Aryans kept on coming to the Indian subcontinent from outside. क्लियर? तो कभी भी एक मेजर इन्वेजिव फोर्स की तरह नहीं आए थे. सो गिव दिस हेडिंग डिबेट रिगार्डिंग द आर्यन इन्वेजन थ्योरी. लिखो. नंबर 1, आर्यन इन्वेजन थ्योरी. आर्यन इन्वेजन थ्योरी. Presented by Mortimer Wheeler, it argued that the warlike horse riding tribes of early Aryans originating from Eurasia mounted a massive and sudden invasion of the Indus Valley civilization. Full stop. This resulted in the sudden destruction of a Harappan civilization at its peak. At its peak. Full stop. Next subpoint. However, this explanation or this theory has largely been rejected as colonial propaganda. As colonial propaganda. ठीक है? इसमें जो फॉर एंड अगेंस्ट आर्ग्यूमेंट्स हैं आप वहां से कॉपी पेस्ट कर सकते हो. नेक्स्ट पॉइंट लिखो. नेक्स्ट पॉइंट. This had two major repercussions in the field of historiography. In the field of historiography. 1 and 2. A massive debate erupted over the subject of Harappan decline. Over the subject of Harappan decline. And number 2, the very idea of a massive and sudden Aryan invasion was challenged. resulting in a major rethinking with regards to the arrival of Aryans, comma, their interaction with the natives and the evolution of the Vedic economy, polity, society, religion, language, and culture. ठीक है? Now, one of the new fields that this new kind of thinking opened up was to question the idea of Aryan invasion, and an alternative explanation for the arrival of Indians was presented, that is Aryan migration theory. Give the next subheading. Number 2, Aryan migration theory. Aryan migration theory. क्या बोलता है ये? That from 1500 BC onwards, Aryans began arriving in India from Eurasia via Afghanistan through the mountain passes in small and successive waves. ठीक है? That this migration did not take place suddenly en masse, but in small numbers over a long period of time, over more than 1,000 years. कैसे पता हमें? On the basis of literary and archaeological evidence पता लगता है, right? On the basis of literature कैसे? Indra, for example, is credited for having brought certain tribes later on, Yadu and Turvasu. ठीक है? Then the beginning of fire worship by Aryans started after arriving in India. They did not bring it to India. They adopted it from the local people. And among the Aryans, किस ग्रुप ने इसको पॉपुलराइज किया? किस ट्राइब ने? भरत ट्राइब. Now, Bharat tribe, as I already mentioned, was mentioned in the context of a particular hymn. कौन सा? Battle of the 10 Kings hymn, also known as the Das Rajan Yuddha hymn, right? And this particular hymn belongs to the 10th book of the Rig Veda, that is the 10th mandala. The Rig Veda consists of 10 different books or 10 different mandalas. Out of these books, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7 are considered to be the oldest, while 1, 8, 9 and 10, तो ये चार जो हैं, they are considered to belong to the later Vedic age, or they are considered to be later compilations, later compositions, right? क्योंकि with the passage of time language evolve होता है, grammar change होता है, syntax change होता है, vocabulary change होता है, right? And ये जो सेकेंड टू सेवेंथ वाले बुक्स हैं, इनका ये सब अलग है और बाद वालों का अलग है. सो ये जो 10 राजन युद्ध है, would this have taken place in the beginning of the early Vedic age or maybe towards the end of the early Vedic age? End of the early Vedic age, right? And Bharat tribe ka arrival and its popularization of fire cult, was that something which happened in the beginning or in the end of the early Vedic age? End of the early Vedic age. ठीक है? And that is why we can say clearly that this was something that started later on. It was popularized by a new arrival in India. ठीक है? Later on they started to popularize it. Okay. Then on the basis of archaeology we can also make similar pronouncement. क्या देखने के लिए मिलता है? That not all groups of Aryans suddenly invaded the subcontinent beginning in 1500 BC. Large collections of Aryans were in fact present in other parts of the world, in Persia also, in Iraq also, in Syria also, in Turkey also, in the Levant region also, right? So large collection of Aryan groups outside India continued even after 1500 BC. And secondly, on the basis of genetic analysis, what can we say? That the genetic composition of the inhabitants of the Indus Saraswati zone did not suddenly, right? ऐसा नहीं था कि अचानक से invasion हुआ. All the original inhabitants were driven away or killed and they were replaced by Aryans. We see gradual building up of the Aryan gene in the population of the people living in the northwest of the continent. ठीक है? The basis of this kind of analysis, Aryan migration theory is supported, and this one seems to be the most plausible since this one has been rejected. Clear? Write down. Following the rejection of the Aryan invasion theory, comma, the theory of gradual migration has gained popularity. According to it, comma, beginning from the middle of the second millennium BCE, horse riding pastoral nomads began arriving in the Indus Saraswati zone from Central Asia via Afghanistan Afghanistan in successive waves. In successive waves. In small numbers. In small numbers. Full stop. Next point. This process continued for almost 1,000 years. Continued for almost 1,000 years. And there was no sudden massive invasion. There was no sudden massive invasion. Full stop. Nor were the original natives, killed or driven away. In large numbers. Full stop. Next point. This is indicated by both the literary as well as archaeological evidence. यहाँ पे क्या करना है? कॉपी पेस्ट करना है पहले वाले डिबेट से, इसको पुराना वाला डिबेट है, क्योंकि हम एविडेंस सारा वही वाला दे रहे हैं, लिटरेचर वाला, आर्कियोलॉजी वाला और जेनेटिक्स वाला. तो सिंपली राइट ब्रैकेट में करके कॉपी फ्रॉम प्रीवियस डिबेट और यूज आर्ग्यूमेंट्स फ्रॉम प्रीवियस डिबेट. Now, Aryan invasion theory ने क्या बोला? What happened after the Aryans invaded the subcontinent? What happened to the natives? या तो सबको वहां से भगा दिया, या तो मार दिया, या तो एनस्लेव कर लिया सबको, राइट? एंड एज अ रिजल्ट हुआ क्या होता? First of all, the genetic composition of the population would have been completely and suddenly changed. ये हुआ? नहीं हुआ, right? In fact, genetic composition में हमको क्या देखने के लिए मिलता है? There is racial and genetic intermixing. That means these people had started to breed with each other. ये देखने के लिए मिला. सेकेंडली क्या देखने के लिए मिला? और बताइए. Did the Aryans not exhibit any changes in their economic life after settling in the Indus Valley region? Did they continue to remain pastoralist nomads throughout the occupation of this region? No. There were changes in economy also. जैसे कि the beginning of agriculture. Now, obviously, a beginning of agriculture suddenly nahi hoga. It would take a long period of time. But that they started to practice agriculture relatively quickly as compared to other pastoralist groups, even if the correct ecological conditions were present in the Indus Valley, were not present in Central Asia or the Eurasian steppe region. तो एक explanation तो वो हो सकता है. दूसरा explanation क्या है? That these practices were taught to them or they adopted these practices from the Chalcolithic and late Harappan cultures living in the Indus Saraswati region at the time that they arrived. Thirdly, social and cultural changes भी देखने के लिए मिलते हैं, राइट? क्या देखने के लिए मिला हमें कल्चरल चेंजेस में? फायर वर्शिप, the adoption of retroflex sounds from the languages of the natives. जब पहले आए थे तो एग्रीकल्चर को उनको ए भी नहीं पता था. इंडिया में आके दे स्टार्टेड प्रैक्टिसिंग लो लेवल ऑफ एग्रीकल्चर. So this was the period when they were just starting agriculture. It took them 500 years to gain some agricultural expertise. And from the later Vedic age, agriculture replaced animal husbandry as the mainstay of the economy. So it became the most important source of subsistence almost 500 years after their arrival. So that means they started practicing agriculture only after arriving in the subcontinent. इसके पहले करते भी होंगे तो बहुत ज्यादा लेवल पे नहीं करते थे, राइट? एंड अब थोड़ा और एक्सपर्टीज आना शुरू हुआ, टेक्नोलॉजिकल सोफिस्टिकेशन बढ़ना शुरू हुआ, प्रोडक्टिविटी इंक्रीज होनी शुरू हुई धीरे धीरे. और दिस कैन बी एक्सप्लेन्ड बाय वन फैक्टर कि यहाँ का क्लाइमेट और इकोलॉजी ज्यादा फेवरेबल था, एंड दैट इज व्हाई दे वर मोर सक्सेसफुल. एग्रीकल्चर बिकेम द मेनस्टे ऑफ द इकोनॉमी ग्रेजुअली. चलो वो एक्सप्लेनेशन तो ठीक है, बट वाज दैट द ओनली एक्सप्लेनेशन? नो. There were certain people already living in these regions which were practicing agriculture, and they transferred their knowledge and expertise to the Aryans, thus leading to the quicker adaptation of agriculture by them. Okay? So 500 years is a relatively short period of time when we are talking in terms of human migration and technological changes, especially in the pre-modern period. ठीक है? तो ये जो relative change हुआ है, that was possible only because यहाँ पे कुछ native groups थे who had a traditional knowledge of agriculture. नहीं होते तो it may have taken them much longer. Clear? अच्छा, और क्या देखने के लिए मिलता है? सोसाइटी में क्या चेंज देखने के लिए मिलता है? That we start seeing color based discrimination among Aryans, right? देखो, from the region of Afghanistan, that is Eurasia through Afghanistan, Aryans had started arriving in India in small bands over more than 1,000 years, or roughly 1,000 years. और ये आ कहां पे रहे थे? In the Indus सरस्वती रीजन. ठीक है? यहाँ पे ऑलरेडी कुछ ग्रुप्स प्रेजेंट थे. कौन? दी नेटिव कैलकुलिथिक पीपल, राइट, एंड दी पीपल बिलोंगिंग टू दी लेट हड़प्पन कल्चर. अब ये फॉरेनर्स कहां से आ रहे थे? ठंडे रीजन से आ रहे थे, नॉर्दर्न क्लाइमेट से आ रहे थे. स्किन कलर कैसा होगा? फेयर होगा, डार्क होगा? ज्यादा फेयर होगा. एंड नेटिव पीपल का डार्कर स्किन टोन था, राइट? नाउ दे मस्ट हैव फॉट विद ईच अदर आल्सो एंड इंटरमिंगल्ड विद ईच अदर. रिजल्ट क्या हुआ? रेशियल इंटरमिक्सिंग. सो these people became relatively darker in skin color, जो बाहर से आए थे, gradually intermix हुए. Then जो later waves आई, उनमें जो element of racial intermixing होगा वो भी उतना ही ज्यादा होगा जितना अर्ली ग्रुप्स में है, या उससे कम होगा? उनसे कम होगा. Therefore the later arrivals had even fairer skin as compared to the early arrivals. ठीक है? And होगा क्या? That these later groups, they are ultimately going to get into a conflict with the earlier groups, ठीक है, and with the other native people. जो नेटिव पीपल हैं उनके कल्चर में और जो अर्ली आर्यंस हैं उनके कल्चर में अब काफी इंटरमिक्सिंग भी हो चुकी है. The early Aryans have lost many of their original traits. They have adopted the lifestyle, the religious beliefs, etc. of the native people only, right? And therefore, clear distinction is now possible between these two racial groups, right? So, color-based discrimination or racial discrimination is going to start. इसका हमको एविडेंस भी मिलता है in the form of the 10 राजन युद्ध. Bharat tribe, which was a tribe of fair-skinned Aryans. ऋग्वेद इनको ऐसे ही डिस्क्राइब करता है कि इनका चमड़ी जो था वो गोरा था. Was fighting against a collection of 5 Aryan and 5 non-Aryan tribes, right? Now, इनका कॉम्प्लेक्शन कैसा होगा? डार्क. इनका कॉम्प्लेक्शन व्हीटिश, ठीक है. Who emerged victorious? The Bharat tribe emerged victorious. And जो defeated tribes थे उनके लोगों को अब क्या करेंगे? Enslave कर लिया जाएगा. The relatively darker Aryan tribes who were defeated, they were given the status of dasas, and the darkest people जो कि non-Aryans थे, original inhabitants, they were given the status of dasyus. Among the dasas and dasyus had the lowest amount of social, you can say, dignity. दासास का भी कम था लेकिन दस्यूस से ज्यादा था. Clear? Because they were of Aryan stock. Basis for discrimination क्या है? Skin color, right? And ये क्या prove करता है? That had all the Aryans arrived in the subcontinent at once, or did they arrive gradually? They arrived gradually. Only then this kind of social discrimination or racial pattern can be visible. Clear? क्या लिखा है अभी आपने? हाँ, वर्ना सिस्टम, रिचुअलिज्म, ये सब तो ठीक है, बट वर्ना सिस्टम ऑफ दैट पीरियड वाज आल्सो बेस्ड ऑन स्किन कलर ओनली. क्या लिखा है आपने? हाँ, यूज आर्ग्यूमेंट्स फ्रॉम अर्लियर. नेक्स्ट मेन पॉइंट लिखो. फर्दर indications of gradual migration are reflected in a genetic intermixing, B, adoption of agriculture or beginning of agriculture by Aryans, and C, social changes such as adoption of fire worship, retroflex sounds and racial discrimination. Retroflex sounds and racial discrimination. Okay. This in fact also proves that sudden invasion nahi hua tha, which resulted in the complete destruction of the natives. Write down. This also proves, next main point likho, this also proves that there was no sudden destruction of the natives. ठीक है, समझ में आया ये? Take down a question. How far is the idea that Aryans invaded North India in the second millennium BCE? Valid? Question mark. How does the theory of gradual migration seek to address misconceptions related to this episode? Question mark. 200 words. हो जाएगा? I think हो जाना चाहिए. Shubhranil? How does the theory of gradual migration seem to address these misconceptions? Seek to address these misconceptions. All right. तो अगर कोई डाउट्स नहीं हो तो आई एम एंडिंग दिस लेक्चर नाउ. आगे की कहानी कल की क्लास में कंटिन्यू करेंगे. इफ देयर आर एनी डाउट्स प्लीज लेट मी नो. नहीं है तो भी बता दो प्लीज. थैंक यू. चलिए कल मिलते हैं.